DFAC was projecting that revenues for the fiscal years 2010 would be in excess of $3.5 billion. Now, two quick comments. DFAC, and I can answer more questions if you have it later, in DFAC, this Economic and Financial Advisory Council, Delaware has what is probably the most credible revenue forecasting process in the entire country. So these are real numbers. And so again, just what these represent, the dotted lines represent where this group, when they met in June, what they projected the revenues would be for these different fiscal years. The 2010 fiscal year starts on July 1st of this year. Is everybody with me so far? So July 1st, 09 to June 30th, 2010, that's the 2010 fiscal year. And back in June, DFAC projected the revenues for that period of time would be in excess of $3.5 billion. But 6 months later, look what happened. The revenues plummeted from over $3.5 billion to $3.086 billion. That's a huge, huge decline. And in fact, DFAC meets again next week. This number is going to be lower still by a significant margin. So revenues, I mean, this is not surprising when you think about what's going on around the country. Revenues are really being hurt. And it's unfortunate that it's at this moment in time when government revenues are challenged so much that people turn to government the most for help, for things like Medicaid. The use of the courts increases. Perhaps some of you know of Delaware families who send their kids to private school or parochial school who can no longer afford to do so, and they're sending their kids to public school. And when that happens, there's a financial obligation on the state as well. So when you combine these two factors, the plummeting revenues and more demand for services, what you get is this enormous budget shortfall. $606 million for next year, that represents 20% of our budget. Even for this year, we have a shortfall still. When I took office about 6 weeks ago, the shortfall for 2009 was $109 million. We've taken some relatively small steps, like we've reduced travel. We're reducing the number of state vehicles that state employees drive, and some other steps that have reduced the budget shortfall from 109 to 56 million for the current year. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes when I talk about the stimulus package, which probably many of you have heard about. But the main takeaway from this slide is just the enormity of a $606 million or 20% budget shortfall. Now let's look at some other states. As you can see, these other states also